I know, I'm like, don't do anything silly. Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Kwiatkowski. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the City of Chicago Department of Procurement Services. Today's workshop is a DPS incentive overview, getting the most from your bids. Thank you so much for being here today. Everyone should have signed in at the front sign-in table. Over there you will have an overview sheet of our programs and incentives, our quarterly buying plan, information about our DPS alerts, and our workshop schedule. So hopefully you pick all of those up in addition to an evaluation form for today's workshop. For those individuals who are watching from home, the PowerPoint for today's presentation is available at www.cityofchicago.org/DPS events. So you can follow along at home with that PowerPoint presentation online or print it out later for your reference. I just want to let you know this room is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. You can watch our workshops on our new YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/ChicagoDPS. The camera is focused here on the speaker and is not recording the audience, just FYI. Also, we ask, because it's being recorded, live streamed, that you hold all questions until the end of the session. So we'll end the workshop a little bit before the 3:30 time. You can ask your questions then, and also you can stay after class and ask any additional questions that you might have. Thank you so much again for being here, and at this time I would like to introduce the speaker for today's workshop, Terry Glavin, who is an attorney with us at the Department of Procurement Services.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to attend this afternoon's workshop. I want to thank you on behalf of Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Commissioner Jamie Rhee, the city's Chief Procurement Officer, for showing an interest in learning about the procurement process for the City of Chicago, but more specifically to learn how you can make the most out of your bids and how you can make the most out of your contracting experience. And bid incentives, as well as certain programs that we have at the City of Chicago, are ways that you can maximize your opportunities, as well as maximize your business relationship with the city. So thank you for attending. We're going to cover a number of topics today, but before we do, I want to give you my contact information. While you're here today, I hope to provide a great amount of detail, but when you leave, you may have some questions that occur to you. When you return to the office or go home this evening, you may realize there's something you wish you had asked. So I want to be an ongoing resource to you, the vendor community, for any ongoing needs that you have. If you reach out to me, I'll do my best to answer any questions I'm able to. And where I can't, I will find a resource at the city that may be the best suited or better suited to answer your questions. So my contact information, my email is my name, so it's TERRENCE.GLAVIN@cityofchicago.org. And you can reach me at my office. The number where I can be reached at is 312-744-0851. And feel free to reach out to me anytime in the future, and I'll do my best to assist you even after today's presentation. Also, this is one of many workshops that the Department of Procurement Services offers on a number of topics. The workshop list is outside the bid and bond room. It's also available online. Additionally, as you've been told, the workshops are streamed online. So we encourage you to attend as many workshops as you can to learn about our process and our procedures. Today, we're here to learn about bid incentives and programs. Now, when we're talking about the procurement process and getting down to the specifics of bid incentives and programs that we have, it's important, I think, to get a high-level view of the context. To talk about incentives and talk about programs without understanding the context of procurement, I think would leave you still wanting more information. So I do want to provide a little bit of context. I'm going to talk a little bit about our department and about the procurement process in general, the laws that apply. But I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail because there are other workshops that cover the details. I also present Procurement Fundamentals workshop, which gets into those fine details of the procurement process. Doing Business with the City of Chicago, which talks about additional process, but also gets into some practical tips about having a business relationship with the city. So there's greater detail of those workshops I encourage you to attend or watch online. But I'll give a little context today just to give you a little bit of background on our topic. So first of all, Department of Procurement Services, our mission, we put contracts into place for the City of Chicago. We put contracts into place so that all the other departments of the city can complete their missions. So to complete their missions, they need goods and services. Those goods and services are purchased typically from private vendors and typically through contracts put into place by our department. So the Chief Procurement Officer, Jamie Rhee, is the individual empowered to put those contracts into place. And she's also empowered by Chicago Municipal Code with a structure, with a framework of how to have a department to put those contracts into place. And so she follows not only state law, but she follows local municipal code that sets those parameters, and it gives her her authority. And we take those parameters very seriously because our process has to be predictable, it has to be reliable, and it has to have integrity. And so we always follow the rules that apply to the procurement process. Now, what are the laws? Again, I'm not going to go into all the details. I'm not going to name the statutes today, but if there's federal funding involved, we apply federal laws typically. If it's city funding, where the city is using its own dollars to make purchases, then we typically follow the Chicago Municipal Code and then the department policies and procedures that we've created within the municipal code parameters. Now, if you want to get up to speed a little bit, which I encourage everyone to do, go to Department of Procurement Services webpage, and there are a number of resources, including all of our policies and procedures. So you can go on there and you can start becoming familiar with all the laws that apply. And as you'll learn in Procurement Fundamentals workshop, as well as doing Business with the City of Chicago workshop, knowing the rules not only benefits us, but it benefits you because it makes you a better competitor. And as you'll learn in these workshops, a lot of the process is about competition. As you become a better competitor, it'll benefit you in earning city business. Brief overview of the procurement process. Goods typically are bid on. That's why we're here today to talk about bid incentives. So by law, by Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act law, for the most part, we award goods, contracts for goods or contracts for work services to the lowest responsive responsible bidder. So what do? We evaluate bidders to make sure that they're presently capable of giving us what we want, the way we want it. We make sure they're giving us those items exactly the way we specified in our solicitation. And after that, we're looking for the lowest price, the lowest bidder. So there's that competition. And that's where bid incentives come into play. Bid incentives can give one vendor perhaps a competitive advantage, if not at the very least, put a vendor back on an even playing field by utilizing one of the bid incentives. We also, by municipal code, have certain certifications for historically disadvantaged groups, like minority business enterprises and women-owned business enterprises and business enterprises owned by people with disabilities. So if you believe you may qualify for one of the programs or incentives that we talk about today, the first place you're going to want to look is the Chicago Municipal Code, because that's where many of those incentives and programs are defined. So we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But at the end of the day, for competitive bids, that's really why it's important to know about these incentives and programs, because they are really intertwined into many of the competitive bids that we put out there. But don't forget, it's not just competitive bids. We also buy services. And professional services are put out through more of an evaluation process, where we don't necessarily go to the lowest bidder, but we go to, perhaps the best way to describe it is the best value, a highly skilled vendor at a good price. And that process may not necessarily involve bid incentives, but it will involve some of these programs. So whether you're providing services, whether you're providing goods, I encourage you to learn about these incentives and programs, because they very well may apply to a project that you're interested in the future. As we get into the material, you may have questions. Since we have a small group here today, I'll take questions during this session. And if you have a question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat your question, if you don't mind, so that the folks that are watching online as we stream can hear the question. We'll bring the microphone over to you, and then I'll do my best to answer the question as we move along. I'll also stick around after this session in case anyone wants to, after we present, ask their question at a later time. I'm glad to stick around and answer questions for those who have time to stick around. With all of that in mind, we can start talking about programs and bid incentives. Before we get into each of the different types of programs and incentives, though, I think it's important to understand a little bit about what I mean in this context. So let's talk about programs. Why do we have certain programs in procurement? The reason being is, well, there can be a number of reasons. One might be that we have historically disadvantaged groups in our business community, or individuals that are historically disadvantaged that want to get into the business community and do business with the city. And they have an interest in having an even playing field for fair competition. And we have an interest in that as well. We want to have fair competition when we put contracts out for bid or for award. So we set up these programs, and it could be historically disadvantaged groups that we're trying to level the playing field for. It can also be small businesses that we are trying to provide benefits for or a fair competitive advantage. It could be veterans. It could be a variety of groups, and we'll walk through the groups that the city is trying to provide programs for. We also have, to assist certain bidders, we have bid incentives. Now, programs usually involve participation, how we assist certain vendors in participating on contracts. Maybe it's allowing them to be an exclusive bidder on a certain project. And then after we've given a certain group opportunity to bid on a project, then maybe we'll open it up to everybody else. But we'll give the first opportunity to certain vendors. Sometimes it might be that the program is meant to assist in participation. So, for example, MBE, WBE requirements in contracts might be put into place so that we assure that there are minority business enterprises and women business enterprises being hired as subcontractors in certain amounts so that they can participate on contracts, earn real city dollars, do real work, and gain real experience so that they can build capacity and perhaps participate as prime contractors on future projects. Those are some of the goals of a variety of our programs. Now, bid incentives work a little differently than participation. Bid incentives are more for vendors when they're bidding. And a typical bid incentive is some percentage off of a bid price for evaluation purposes only. So I'll give a quick example so that you understand what bid incentives typically are about. Let's say there's a certain category of businesses that we believe qualify for a bid incentive. And let's say by Chicago Municipal Code, it was determined that it'd be appropriate to have a 5% bid incentive for that group of businesses. What does that mean? It would mean, for example, if we were going to buy a certain commodity, a certain good, and we put it out for bid, and let's say there's only 2 vendors out in the community that actually sell that type of good. So those are our 2 bidders. And let's say one bidder qualifies for the incentive and the other bidder does not qualify for any incentives. Well, when they bid, in this example, they both bid, let's say $100,000. They both bid the same exact amount. Well, if there was no incentive out there, we'd have a tie, and we might have to find a solution to that tie. But let's say there is an incentive in our case. What happens? For evaluation purposes only, we look at the vendor that qualified for the incentive, and in our example, it was a 5% incentive. So for evaluation purposes, that vendor's bid is considered $95,000, 5% off of their bid. The other vendor that did not qualify for the incentive, their bid is still considered to be $100,000. Well, by Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act law, we have to award to the lowest responsible bidder. So the qualifying firm at an evaluated price of $95,000 is awarded the contract. It's important to realize, though, that when they perform the contract, there's no penalty for exercising that ability to get the bid incentive. So when the vendor actually performs, they're actually paid $100,000 for the goods that are delivered. So remember, the bid incentive applies only to the competition, but not to the actual performance of the contract. So that's a very simplistic example of how bid incentives can use. Now, remember, that's an example. So there are a variety of bid incentives. Bid incentives might be for a specific amount, like 5%. They might be for a lesser amount, like 3%. Or, and you'll see later in our presentation, you might have an example like locally manufactured goods that we have under contract. Well, depending on the amount of goods that we're buying, that percentage of incentive can change. So it gives you an idea that you have to keep in mind that there are some fine details in each incentive. That's why I wanted to talk about the municipal code earlier. As I go through some of these examples, I want you to keep in mind, you can go to the municipal code and see all the details. And what I encourage everyone to do is to go to the municipal code if you believe you qualify for one of the incentives I summarized today. Read through it and see if you truly qualify and if you can take advantage of it. Now, how do you do that? First of all, jot down as we go through today each of the incentives that I talk about by name. And you can go to a website. There's a website that publishes officially the Chicago Municipal Code. It's amlegal.com. It's an official publisher. amlegal.com. And it's a very user-friendly website. You go there, it'll show you a map. You click on Illinois, it'll bring up a list of cities. You click on the city of Chicago, it'll open up a couple options. One of those is Chicago Municipal Code. You click on there, and then it'll list by code numbers different sections. It's really simple to get to our municipal code section, 2-92. So you just scroll down, go to 2-92, and you'll be able to open up the municipal code section that applies to procurement services and a variety of information, including information about programs and incentives. Now, when you go to the Chicago Municipal Code, or when you listen today, what are you trying to do, or what's the best approach to figuring out whether or not you have any program or incentive? A good way to go about it is find out the authority for the incentive or program. So in any of these cases, there is a 2-92 section that applies. And you want to read what kind of projects or what kind of contracts that the incentive or program applies to. You also want to look at the definitions, and you want to look at whether or not your business or you as an individual fall within one of the definitions that the incentive or program applies to. And then you want to see what are the conditions of you being able to not only qualify within the definition for that program, but how to bid or what you need to do in order to make sure that the incentive or program applies. Now, once you have an interest in doing that, you can always reach out to me again, as I've said. That's why at the very beginning I gave you my contact information. If you are having trouble finding a section of municipal code, or if you just are wondering a little bit about how the program or incentive works, reach out to me. I'll be glad to provide assistance where I can or find a resource for you. So what are the programs and incentives? Well, the first program would be Diversity Credit Program. Actually, I'm going to start with Small Business Initiative Construction. Let me take a step back. So what is Small Business Initiative for Construction, or SBI for construction? Is anyone in the room in the construction industry? No. Well, there may be a few folks online that are interested, or you may in the future have an interest in construction projects. So I'll talk about it briefly, and hopefully it'll spark some interest or curiosity. The Small Business Initiative is meant to help local construction companies, their small businesses, participate on city contracts. It's designed to encourage these small businesses to participate on construction projects that are under $3 million. Now, in order to participate in the program, you've got to be able to figure out whether or not the project is a certain size. So there's two tiers in this program. There's SBI, or Small Business Initiative 1, and there's SBI Small Business Initiative 2. SBI 1 is projects under $3 million. SBI 2 is under $2 million. When you bid, the project has to be under that dollar amount, and then depending on which tier the project is within, it'll determine what size small business can participate. But at the end of the day, the small business has to be one that has meets a certain size standard, or stays under a certain size standard as determined by federal law. So if you go to the Chicago Municipal Code, you can learn a little bit about the bid incentive. But at the end of the day, what does this program do? This program allows local construction companies to bid on these under $3 million projects, and to do so exclusively. And that's quite a benefit for vendors, to be able to, if they qualify as these small businesses, to be able to bid at exclusively of other vendors. Now, not only can you look at the size standards, though, keep in mind, if you are an MBE or a WBE, you automatically qualify because of the size standards that are incorporated into the requirements for MBE and WBE programs. So keep in mind that if you are an MBE or WBE, you're presumed to meet the definition of an SBI for these programs. So that is one program that is worth looking into. Now, what about participation, not just by small businesses, but what about participation by MBEs and WBEs? I talked earlier how we have, by ordinance, goals of having, at the very least, MBEs and WBEs participate as subcontractors on projects. By ordinance, the goals are 25% participation by MBEs and 5% participation by WBEs. We can exceed those goals, which we try to do, but those are the goals that are set by ordinance. So, prime contractors have to have MBEs and WBEs participate in their contracts if those are the goals or the requirements. Now, sometimes there are opportunities that are outside of an immediate contract where MBEs and WBs are being used or can be used. And this is an opportunity for prime contractors to get credit for that participation. So what is the diversity credit program? The diversity credit program is basically an opportunity where if a prime contractor has been using MBEs and WBEs on private contracts, they can utilize credit for that participation on private contracts up to 5% on city contracts. So let's say, for example, on private contracts, you've utilized an MBE. And say, for example, you then are applying or bidding on a city contract. And that city contract has goals or requirements of 25% MBE, 5% WBE. You can actually get up to 5% credit towards those goals on the city contract based on utilization of the MBEs or WBEs on private contracts. So it's quite an incentive. And it's actually beneficial because there are times where a certain industry or a certain section of work, there might not be every single time certified MBEs and WBEs in those areas of work. But we still want MBEs and WBEs to participate in work. So if this will encourage utilization of firms in the private sector, then even the application to our credits is still benefiting the MBE, WBE community because it's encouraging work by MBEs and WBEs in private sector contracts or private sector work. So it's beneficial to all, the city, the primes, as well as the MBE, WBE community. Now what about projects where we want to not only have participation by firms that are certified, but we want to do even more to build capacity? Well, what we have to address that issue is we have what we call a mentor-protege program. And what the mentor-protege program is it is a program that allows prime contractors to earn up to 5 additional points of participation credit towards MBE and WBE goals on contracts by entering into a mentor-protege relationship with a certified firm. Now, by the way, this is a written agreement. And it is an agreement that a prime is going to truly mentor a protege or a certified firm. It has to be applied for, so our Chief Procurement Officer will review proposed mentor-protege relationships. And those proposed mentor-protege relationships will talk about how often the mentor is going to work with the protege, what they're going to do at their meetings, what capacity building exercises they're going to be involved in. It's going to teach proteges not just how to do the work of that contract that they're being utilized on or that they're working around, but it's going to teach them areas of business and how to do business with the city. So it could be teaching a protege how to invoice, how to, where to work as far as collecting a payment from the comptroller of the city, how to manage employees. So there's a number of administrative matters that can be addressed in addition to the work that's being completed on the project at hand. So the mentor-protege relationship is an excellent opportunity for mentors or prime contractors with a great deal of experience to get together with proteges and help them build their capacity. And in return, they get those 5 additional points of credit towards participation. So it's really, again, another program where it's a win-win relationship for the mentor, the protege, but also for the city of Chicago that we get to complete the work, but we also get to build capacity for certified firms. So those are the primary programs I wanted to talk about today. And having talked about programs, I want to get into the bid incentives a little bit. Now, again, bid incentives are typically incentives that are offered to vendors that qualify, and it gives them, at the very least, hopefully an even playing field for competition when they're bidding, but it also may give them a competitive advantage during a certain bid opportunity. Now, I repeated small business enterprise because it is a program, but I just want to remind everybody, it's kind of a bid incentive. It's somewhere in between, right? Because it gives a vendor an exclusive opportunity to bid on certain projects. So small business enterprises, through the SBI construction program, it's not just a program, it's actually a somewhat of a bid incentive in that vendors get an exclusive bidding opportunity on projects. Now, veteran-owned business enterprises are opportunities for vendors when you have a veteran-owned business enterprise that gets together with a small business enterprise in a project, for example, a construction project, they can form a joint venture. And when they form this joint venture, they get a business preference as far as their bid. So the bid preference is 5% bid incentive off the contract-based price, and it's for joint ventures that occur between small business enterprises and veteran-owned business enterprises. Does everyone know what a joint venture is? One gentleman? Okay. It's basically an agreement to partner up for a limited project or for a limited scope. So what happens is two businesses, they're going to keep their own identities, but they're going to enter into a joint venture agreement, and it's basically an enterprise that they're forming just to perform a specific task or goal or project. And joint enterprises may move on and continue to do work, but it's not something that's meant to be perpetual. It's usually meant to be a venture for a specific goal in mind or a certain project in mind that you want to complete. And when you get together, you have to have those two parties. One has to be a small business enterprise, and then one has to be a veteran-owned business enterprise. And when you bid, this goes back to my explanation of incentives. What's the benefit? The benefit is that when you bid, and I'll use the example again, if you're a veteran-owned business with a small business enterprise and you're bidding, and you bid $100,000, and a non-vet firm or one that does not qualify as the right type of joint venture bids at $100,000, you win. At 5% off, $95,000 bid versus a $100,000 bid, you win. So it's really a incentive that allows you to have a competitive advantage when competing for contracts based on those two types of status, veteran-owned business enterprise and then a small business enterprise. So that is the benefit. Now, business enterprises owned by people with disabilities is another category of certification of firm that allows participation by businesses that are owned by historically disadvantaged groups, one of those being business enterprises owned by people with disabilities. Now, whenever I talk about MBE, WBE, BEPD, keep in mind that those firms are firms that qualify for these programs, but MBEs and WBEs have a slightly different program than BEPDs. BEPDs don't have those participation goals. It's bid incentive that applies. So for BEPDs, business enterprises owned by individuals with disabilities, the vendor, based on the size of the project, they get a certain percentage off of their bid incentive. So if there's anyone that has an interest in business enterprises owned by people with disabilities or believe they qualify as that type of firm, then please reach out to me and we can talk a little bit about what percentage of discount off your bid you get as a result of that status. But it is another bid incentive that gives a equal opportunity to BEPDs. Additionally, to individuals that are historically disadvantaged, we also have incentives that help businesses of various kinds to participate, like small business enterprises. But these businesses are ones that are part of the local economy. So we have incentives that help businesses that are in the local economy. So what are examples of businesses that have a bid incentive that are part of the local business economy? One is the city-based manufacturer incentive. City-based manufacturer incentive. It's for businesses that produce goods locally, and when I say produce, it could be the typical from-scratch manufacturing that you might think of, but it can also be, to a certain degree, assembly of goods. So I encourage you, if you are a manufacturer of goods and you believe that you are producing goods that are locally manufactured, check out the definition and see if your goods fall within that definition, and if they do, they might work. Now, you don't actually have to be the producer of those goods either. If you're supplying locally manufactured goods, then the bid preference can apply. So the bid incentive to bidders can be for providing goods made or assembled in the city of Chicago. And the incentive varies based on the volume of goods that are being purchased. So, for example, if we have a contract and 25% to 49% of the goods that we buy are locally manufactured, the incentive is 1% off the contract bid. If it's 50 to 74% of the goods we buy in total are manufactured within the city of Chicago, the bid incentive is 1.5% off the total price. And above 75% of the items being from locally manufactured, the bid incentive is 2%. So this is an example of a tiered bid incentive for locally manufactured goods. Now, in addition to locally manufactured goods, we have a number of other incentives to help out local businesses and individuals. Another example is city-based business. Okay? If you are a city-based business, then you may qualify for a incentive. Now, what is a city-based business? It's a person who conducts meaningful day-to-day business operations at a facility located within the city, and that the facility is the place of employment for the majority of the person's regular full-time workforce, and you have to hold all your appropriate licenses, and you have to pay all the appropriate taxes of a local business. And if all those are the case, then you can qualify for a city-based business preference. Now, beyond city-based businesses, we also have opportunities for bidders that are going to participate on projects and where their workforce is made up of residents of the project area. So this is a very valuable incentive both for the vendors that are participating, but as well as for the community that's involved in the project. So when we have a project in a certain area, what happens is we want to encourage vendors that are going to utilize or that are going to participate on work in a certain area. We want them to utilize residents where possible to work on the project. And that way, dollars for those projects that are flowing from the city are actually flowing through those contracts to those prime contractors and actually getting down into the hands of individuals that are working ideally on their own community. So there's a incentive for vendors to use project area residents on their projects. And then there's a step up from there. We also have incentives for primes to use subcontractors that are from the project area. So it's not just that you want to use area residents on certain projects, you want to use project area subcontractors. How do you know when you're going to be able to take advantage of one of these incentives, and When are you going to know how the incentive is going to apply? Well, first of all, you can look for these incentives in the Chicago Municipal Code, as I described. But for any of these incentives, keep in mind, when you're going to bid on a project, you're going to pick up a bid package. And that bid package is going to detail all the information about the project, from what the project's about, where you're going to work, what the work's about, right down to how you're going to bid, when you submit your bid, at what time. So all the details are in that bid package. And those bid packages contain specifications. Specifications specify all the details of projects, including bid incentives and programs that apply. So if you really are curious about whether or not you can take advantage, that's a great place to look. In fact, you should read every word of every specification for a variety of reasons. But I encourage you to read every word, including incentive sections, because then you'll truly know which one of these incentives may apply and how to apply for them. Now, beyond project area residents, project area subcontractors, apprentice utilization, city-based businesses, manufacturers, there is one last incentive I do want to talk about, and that is alternatively powered vehicle incentive. If you have a fleet of vehicles that qualifies, then, and that fleet of vehicles uses alternatively powered vehicles, and there's a variety of alternatives for fuel, but basically it's a green incentive. If you have a fleet of vehicles that qualify under one of the alternatively powered vehicles requirements, then you may get a bid incentive off of your bid on projects where you're going to be using that fleet to perform the project. So keep in mind that if you have alternatively powered vehicles, there is a bid incentive for that as well. Now that's a very high-level overview of the programs that we have at the Department of Procurement Services and the bid incentives that we have at the Department of Procurement Services. Each of the programs and incentives have their own unique facets, they have their own unique details, they have their own municipal code section that authorizes them. So again, I want you to take a look. If any of these topics sound like something that may apply to you or your business, I encourage you to reach out and get more information. We can provide summaries for each of the incentives, if that's helpful. And I'd be glad, if you reach out to me, I'd be glad to email a copy, or our outreach coordinators can email copies of these. So if you have a certain type of program or incentive that you believe you might qualify for, you can reach out to me, indicate what program you're interested in, and I can send you one of these flyers. And when you look at these, they're organized, they're very user-friendly. You typically start out with listing the municipal code at the top that creates the authority for the program or incentive, list of definitions, what types of individuals or businesses typically are defined, and whether or not they're covered by the incentive or program. Usually then goes into what's the amount of credit or what's the benefit of utilizing the program. And then oftentimes it goes into what is a very important detail, whether or not programs or incentives can be stacked or are compatible. So that's one more thing I want to mention to you. Keep in mind, there are individuals and businesses that oftentimes satisfy more than one program. So let's say, for example, I have a firm where I am a local business and I'm a local manufacturer. Each of those has a certain bid incentive, right? Well, if you qualify for both, the question is going to be, can I stack them? So in other words, if one incentive, and I'll just throw out more general numbers, but let's just say there's one incentive I qualify for where 5% is the incentive, and there's another incentive program where there's 5%. Do I get 10%? it's important to look at the municipal code as well as to the specifications in the bid package. It'll indicate, you'll be able to determine whether or not programs or incentives are compatible or can be stacked. Typically, you're not supposed to qualify for more than one at a time. But read the specifications carefully. Also look at the Chicago Municipal Code, and it's really case by case. And then if you have questions, you can always reach out to me as well in the future. And as I said, as an attorney for the city, I can't always advise everybody, but I'll do my best to answer any questions I can. And as I said, I'll try to find a resource. If I'm unable to answer, I'll try to find the best resource at the city to provide information. So those are the programs and incentives. That's how the forms are laid out. Please look into these programs and incentives for your own benefit. Reach out to me if you have further questions. Also, keep in mind that the Department of Procurement Services has a large volume of information and resources on our web page, so cityofchicago.org/procurement. I encourage everyone just to wander around. It's one of the best ways to learn because there's so much information on the website. Also, Department of Procurement Services is extremely active on social media and networking sites, so Facebook, Twitter. Kathy does an excellent job of putting all that information out there so it's easily accessible by the vendor community and the public. So look at our social networks, keep in touch with us online, and we'll be glad to follow up with you there as well as by phone or email. And finally, before I take questions and answers, I do want to thank everybody again, I know you have busy schedules as individuals and business owners, and I appreciate taking time out of your schedule to learn more about the process at the City of Chicago. With that, please check the workshop schedule. As I said, there are a large volume of workshops that the Department of Procurement Services presents. They're all very helpful, taught by more or less the experts in each subject matter area, so you're really getting the information straight from the authority. And lastly, you can check online because the workshops are all streamed, so you can actually check in at home and see what we're up to. With that, any questions?
Yes, my question was, do all the incentives and programs apply to all bids that go out? Or do you have to go bid by bid, so to speak?
Bid by bid. So not every bid or incentive is going to apply to every program. So it's key to take 2 steps at the very least. When you have a project you're interested in, pick up that bid package, and I always say this, the specifications that are included in the bid package, they'll include not only details about the project, but details about any incentives and programs that are involved, like MBE, WBE compliance requirements, programs and incentives of other kind. So read those specifications right down to the detail, and there will be statements like, this project is appropriate for local manufacturer, local business, so on and so forth. There might be statements like, this certain incentive does not apply, or you may use these 2 incentives together, or in another instance, a project might say, you cannot stack or use 2 incentives or programs together. So read those specifications in detail, because they're really your guide for bidding correctly and taking advantage of programs. If it applies, follow those rules. Also, double check the municipal code for all the definitions and projects. It'll oftentimes talk about the projects that it does apply to. So you'll be able to get information there.
And the forms, et cetera, would probably be there already, or would you have to obtain those or find those elsewhere?
Typically, the bid package is the universe of documents that you're going to need. So, for example, if you are going to be utilizing MBEs and WBs on a project, the bid package will include what are called Schedule Cs and Ds, where you actually write out who your MBE is that you're using and what percentage your WBE is. And those documents, those schedules are actually put in with your bid when you submit them on bid opening day. If there's anything referenced in the specifications and you don't see a form for it, it might mean you're supposed to create your own summary, like maybe a narrative or a letter. If it just seems a little confusing, oftentimes before bids are due, there's a pre-bid conference, and that's a great time for vendors to come in and seek what we call clarification. If you ask a question and you say, hey, it sounds like there should be a form here, but there's not, we might say, there should be a form. We'll do an addenda. We'll put that addenda back out, and all the vendors will get it. Or we might say, no, we'll clarify it for you. There's no form due, but over here it says you got to write your own affidavit, and in that case, you write your own affidavit. So make sure you go to pre-bid meetings if there's one made available to ask questions and answers. If there's no pre-bid, you can contact the contract staff member that's listed on that project and seek clarification, and we'll clarify where we can.
Last question. On the alternative fueled powered vehicles, is that cut and dry like it must be a electric or something, or is there
a variety. It's not just electric, but there are specifically defined alternative fuels that are identified. And what I can do is, if you want to stick around and give me your contact information, I'll be happy to send you the actual summary that defines each of the type of alternative fuels that are acceptable. And that form will even define, based on the work, what makes up a fleet, how many vehicles are needed to make up a fleet. And so it'll give you all those details. It's actually quite a bit of detail, enough for you to get good guidance about whether you qualify or not.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Again, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this session. We'll look forward to seeing you in the future at additional workshops. Thank you.